Cool. Okay, we have another question in the room.
All right, so we know some open source projects become huge, like the Kubernetes project. What are some other things that set them apart from the ones that don't actually get to that level? I know we've mentioned some of them, like Brandon, or some of them like fostering the community, making it easy for that first commit, things like that. But what are some of the other things that made projects like Kubernetes project? It pretty much took on Docker, right? Like Docker, offerings for container orchestration. And I think Docker obviously came before Kubernetes. So what are some of the things about Kubernetes project, for example, that made it so successful?
That's a great question, I guess.
Kelsey Hightower and Brandon. No, I'm just kidding.
It is. I mean, no, actually, I do actually want to give a really serious shout out to Kelsey. Someone earlier mentioned Mitchell pounding the pavement for Vagrant.
Yeah.
Pounding the pavement is 100% part of it, right? And I don't think Kelsey wrote a single line of code in Kubernetes in the beginning. And I will say, in all honesty, the project would not exist in its current form and success without what he did, right? And I think it's a real testament to the fact that advocacy, evangelism, telling the story, like, he's just an amazing storyteller, and telling that story makes a huge difference. But I will also say that, getting back to what we talked about earlier, giving everybody a reason that they could win, a reason that if this thing won, they would win, right, was a huge part of it, right? And I think all good platforms go by that. Like, for every dollar I make, somebody else makes 10, right? And I think that's the other piece. It doesn't have to be money, but you have to get people to believe that they will win if your thing wins, right? And I think we did a really good job of that, about like letting making it a true open ecosystem, and not anointing kings, and like all of this stuff that really helped us have a lot of shared victories. So, but I think there's also, I guess what I would also say is, like, I think there's a little confirmation bias also, right? Like, sometimes you just win because you're the one who won. And then people are like, how did you win? And it turns out, well, maybe it was, like, the right time and luck, and like, the right, so like, I think we did a lot of things right, but I also think that reverse engineering it sometimes is a little bit tricky, because somebody had to, sort of like somebody had to win. I don't know. Yeah.
But there was a huge demand for that kind of a thing, right? So for folks who've done operations for any length of time, we're banging our heads on the fact that, there's all these dependency issues that were largely solved by the containers, and without containers, they're, like, Kubernetes isn't necessarily as interesting, right? Because like it solved a lot of like portability issues. Like, how do I ship this thing from place to place? How do I quickly iterate on standing up infrastructure and spreading it out across a fleet of servers? Like, there were primitives we could do within that environment, but that demand of what we were solving, that next generation of operational issues that we'd seen from the next iteration of something like Borg into the community project of Kubernetes, like that, it scratched an itch that everybody had. And I think that a lot of these successful open source projects, they actually solve a need that lots of people have. And, like Terraform's a great thing. Like, I want to be able to provision infrastructure with a similar language across a wide variety of things. Like, even though that we promoted that product, I think just the brand of what it was from HashiCorp, from the evolution from Vagrant into something like Terraform, helped to launch that a lot quicker. And we didn't necessarily need somebody like Kelsey to make Terraform there, because we'd already started building that capabilities with something like Vagrant, and people understood this is sort of like Vagrant for the cloud. But as an operator, like, when somebody told me about Kubernetes the first time, I was like, sign me up. And then 2 years later, we we finally got to production. But I think the interesting thing about that and is that a lot of people realized that there was a bunch of different problems within the Kubernetes space and solved it. Like, I don't know how many people wrote Helm to begin with, but when Helm came out, we're like, oh crap, we wrote that and we didn't do as good of a job. So let's just use Helm, or, sort of insert other accelerated tools that we have here. And I think that's the thing, is like, you find the most amount of pain that you can solve in an elegant way, and like your project's going to blow up and it'll probably be successful. I would hope so anyways.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about the sort of like, a lot of people don't care whose project wins. They just want the one that is going to do the best job for that undifferentiated heavy lifting, right?
Mhm.
And so if you can be the one that either does the best job or is the most welcoming or has the best docs or whatever, like they're just going to choose you, not because you're awesome, but just because they have a job to do and they want to check that box and move on, right? And I think there's a certain amount of that too. Like once we got over a certain point, like people are just like, oh, that's just the choice. Check, done. Let me go build some AI.
So I guess come to the luck thing. There's the old thing that the more work you put in, the luckier you get. So the more effort you put into the project, the more chance you have of being the lucky one that takes it there. I think you're talking about docs as well. Docs are hugely important. I was reading recently about the JavaScript CSS framework space. I'm not a web person, so I get confused by all the different things. But I was reading that Tailwind is kind of being the clear winner at the moment, simply because the docs are the best. So if you don't document the feature, it doesn't exist. Doesn't matter how much time you put into it. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. So without good docs, you cannot be lucky. You could never be a successful project if people do not know how to use it. So by investing that time in docs, you're increasing your luck, I would say.